Okay, so let's finish the digestive system. We're talking about the accessory glands, so it shouldn't take too long. The salivary glands we've talked a little bit about. We'll talk about their location and what they produce. Liver, gallbladder, pancreas. So the major jobs we'll talk about along the way. And there's a figure that shows them here. Salivary glands in and around the oral cavity, the liver, the gallbladder, and pancreas. So saliva is produced by these salivary glands in the oral cavity, which flushes the oral surfaces and maintains a normal pH in the mouth, but builds up, basically also prevents the buildup of acids produced by bacteria, keeps your oral cavity safe and healthy, but also contains antibodies that control oral bacterial populations. The salivary reflex. So if you ever looked at food or smelled food and you just start to salivate, that's basically a parasympathetic innervation, parasympathetic activation that's triggered by sight, smell, or even the thought of food, or by an object that enters the oral cavity. And there's 3 pairs of salivary glands: sublingual under the tongue that secrete mucus that acts as a buffer and a lubricant in the oral cavity. The submandibular under the mandible salivary glands secrete a mixture of buffers, mucus, and what's called salivary amylase that starts to break down carbohydrates in the mouth, but also transports antibodies into the saliva. And then parotid salivary glands that secrete a large amount of salivary amylase. So there's 3 different glands, all of which contribute to the production of saliva in a different way in the oral cavity. So right here they are. There's the parotid salivary gland, kind of back near where your ear is located. If you've ever gotten like a weird feeling in the back of your jaw when you eat something like really sour, that's the parotid salivary gland producing a bunch of saliva mixed with that salivary amylase. There's the sublingual gland under the tongue and the submandibular gland under the mandible. A disorder in the salivary gland is called the mumps, which we have a vaccine that is effective. The MMR is measles, mumps, and rubella. Typically occurs around 5 to 9 years of age, but it's an infection of the salivary glands, mostly the parotid salivary gland, the one back by your ear, but can affect other glands as well. And that can cause sterility in post-adolescent males due to the infection of the testes. So this infection can spread. It can be really serious. But we have a vaccine that makes it preventable. The liver is composed of 4 lobes. The major lobes are the right and left lobe. So the large lobes here, right and left. And they're separated by what's called the falciform ligament. There's also caudate and quadrate lobes that, can you see? There's the quadrate lobe here, this small lobe. And the caudate lobe is this kind of ovular shape here at the back of the liver. So it's much smaller lobes. There's also associated with the liver something called the common bile duct, and that's here. There's actually the common bile duct. The liver produces bile. It's the major job of the liver in the digestive system, which the liver has a lot of different jobs in the body. But with regard to the digestive system, one of its major jobs is to produce bile that helps break down fats in the intestine. So the common bile duct basically takes bile from the liver and the gallbladder and transports it to the duodenum. So one of the major jobs of the liver in metabolic digestive function is to produce and secrete bile. It gets stored in the gallbladder. We'll talk about that later. The liver also is a major storage depot for glycogen, which is your storage form of glucose, so blood sugar, but also lipid reserves, so fat reserves. It helps maintain normal concentrations of glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids by freeing up or storing glucose to or from glycogen. But it can also convert other nutrients like carbohydrates to fats, lipids, or amino acids to carbohydrates. So you can basically synthesize and convert nutrient types. So the liver is really fancy. It can inactivate toxins, so it helps filter the blood, store iron, but also store fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Other major functions. So the liver is crazy. It also synthesizes plasma proteins from amino acids, synthesizes clotting factors that help repair vascular damage, destroys damaged red blood cells by way of phagocytosis. So there's phagocytic cells called Kupffer cells that are located in the liver. It can store blood for a period of time, absorb and break down hormones and immunoglobulins, which are antibodies, and absorb and inactivate lipid-soluble drugs. So the liver is like your garbage disposal. It just gets rid of everything that you don't need that's being sent into the body. Disorders can be really serious because your liver is like your garbage disposal. It's your filtration system of all blood coming from the digestive system organs that have allowed the entry of nutrients, electrolytes, some wastes. When the liver gets inflamed, that can be caused by excessive alcohol consumption or even an infection. So hepatitis, remember ITIS is an inflammation of something, and HEPA is liver. So hepatitis is an inflammation of the liver. That can cause cirrhosis, which is basically a degeneration of the liver cells, hepatocytes, and the replacement of those cells by connective tissue, which is basically scarring. And that can compromise the function of the liver. And there's different types of hepatitis, A, B, and C. The most common form is viral, and that affects and destroys the cells of the liver, hepatocytes, and can cause inflammation and fever. The breaking down of bile in the digestive system leads to the production of what's called bilirubin. And jaundice is a buildup of bilirubin in the blood, causing a yellowing of the skin in the eyes. So the whites of your eyes that you should normally be white can turn yellow. That's what we consider jaundice. It's common in babies, but it shouldn't be common in adults, but it's treatable. There's cirrhosis of the liver. That's buildup of scar tissue, which is pretty gnarly. All right. A gallbladder is associated with the liver. It doesn't produce bile. It just stores the bile and concentrates it that's been produced by the liver. So there's a pathway from the liver. There's a right and a left common hepatic duct that take the produced bile and send it to a common hepatic duct. And that common hepatic duct transports bile either into the common bile duct or up through the cystic duct to the gallbladder, where bile is concentrated and stored. So the gallbladder does not produce bile. It just stores and concentrates the bile that's produced by the liver. And then as that's needed, when food enters the duodenum, there's a hormone that gets secreted when fat is introduced to the duodenum that tells the gallbladder to contract, their smooth muscle there, and basically squirt out bile into the duodenum by way of what's called the hepatopancreatic sphincter. So hepato, remembers liver, pancreatic is pancreas. So there's a sphincter, a smooth muscle, circular smooth muscle right here called the hepatopancreatic sphincter, where the duct of the pancreas meets with the common bile duct, and there's a smooth muscle that surrounds it, the hepatopancreatic sphincter, and that regulates how much bile and pancreatic enzyme gets into the duodenum to break down food. Gallbladder disorders, gallstones, they're basically crystals of insoluble minerals and salts, so bile salts that get just kind of crystallized and trapped in the gallbladder. And they can be flushed through the bile ducts and excreted typically with no problem if they're small. But if they're large, they may need to be removed surgically. The pancreas secretes into the pancreatic duct, so excretory cells secrete pancreatic juice almost a liter a day. And there's a second accessory pancreatic duct found in a small percentage of the population. But basically the pancreatic duct with all the digestive enzymes, pancreatic juices, meets with the common bile duct at that hepatopancreatic sphincter I just talked about. So here's the pancreas, this big, large duct. Some of the population has the accessory pancreatic duct, not everybody. But the major duct right here is the hepatopancreatic sphincter, where the common bile duct meets and empties bile into the duodenum, where the pancreatic juices are emptied into the duodenum as well. Those pancreatic juices have enzymes that can break down carbohydrates and proteins, like pancreatic alpha amylase, which is a carbohydrate. It breaks down carbohydrates and certain starches. It's very similar to salivary amylase, so you're further breaking down carbohydrates here. There's pancreatic lipase, which breaks down lipids, and proteolytic enzymes that break down proteins. And their active forms include enzymes like trypsin, chymotrypsin, elastase is one, carboxypeptidase. So think peptide is proteins. Our proteo is proteins. So proteolytic enzymes break down proteins. And pancreatitis can be really severe. It's an inflammation. And remember, ITIS is an inflammation. So pancreatitis is an inflammation of the pancreas. And that can be caused by gallstones, viral infections, or even drugs and alcohol, overuse. Injury to that pancreatic cells basically activates lysozymes, and lysozymes are what just break down cells. So the digestive enzymes are activated and released within the cells and start to physically break down the cells, as opposed to being sent into the pancreatic duct and then into the digestive system. And in about 1/8 of cases, death actually occurs because the process doesn't stop and the pancreas just keeps being destroyed and then releases those enzymes into the body. And you have no way of digesting food. Okay, so that does it for the digestive system and chapter 15. So I will see you in the next chapter.